välkomnar jag upp alla som har talat idag. I would like all speakers on stage for the concluding panel discussion. Jag vill också välkomna Göran Hemmerén, seniorprofessor i medicinsk etik i Lunds universitet och före detta sakkunnig. Mikael Sandlund, han kommer där. Ordförande Läkarsällskapets delegation för medicinsk etik och han sitter nu som sakkunnig i SMER. Inger Torpenberg, där var du. Etikhandläggare vid Svensk sjuksköterskeförening och också välkommen till Nils Lynö, seniorprofessor Karolinska institutet, och det är han som ska moderera den här delen av seminariet.
Okay. I'm not. Jag tar det på. I'll talk in Swedish, and if there are questions, I'll address it to you.
Thank you.
Jag vet inte riktigt om det finns utrymme för mig här egentligen, men jag får i uppgift i alla fall att be Göran och Mikael och Inger att kommentera det som ni har hört nu här, om det är något ni har reflekterat över här, att ni ska få ett tillfälle att göra det här, ni som inte har tillfälle till. Du kan börja.
The panel is a bit overcrowded, but I'll try to be brief in the interest of time. And when I started to think about the theme, etik i praktiken, ethics in practice, I took down a few sentences, and now I've scribbled so many other sentences on top of them, so I can hardly read what I said, but what I wrote. But I think one sentence to begin with, ethics in practice, what about the problems? Several people here have stressed, begin with the problems that you come across in everyday practice. I think that's very important to do that. And we've heard some good reasons and some good examples on that. Then, what about the gaps? I really enjoyed your presentation, Christine. And of course, there are more than 3 gaps. And we have to begin with identifying the gaps and then do something about them. And what I wrote down was, my ideal is a number of people sit around the table. There is a problem that everybody is interested in, and everybody is contributing to the discussion of that problem, given their background, their knowledge, their expertise, and so on. And of course, then it becomes important, as you are stressed, to use including language, and to use simple, plain language and avoid difficult words, because otherwise you will not get the discussion going. And another sentence I thought about in connection with this is, be aware of false oppositions, theory versus practice. We need both. We need to arrive at well-founded ethical decisions. And then we need, as came across in several presentations, both theoretical background and we need also experience. And that's why this discussion of all the involved stakeholders, where all the gaps are represented, is so important. I have more on my list, but I think I'll close there.
Okay. Shall we continue, Mikael?
Thank you. Well, I think I really agree with you about the 3 gaps, but I think there is a 4th gap as well, the gap between professionals' ethics and patients' ethics. This has really been a worry to me during some time. Of course, most of us who are professional in healthcare, we are good ones, and we really want to do the good. That's why we are here, and we become frustrated and perhaps morally distressed when certain factors around us, infrastructure or resources or a boss who don't understand what it's all about, or politicians that don't understand, or whatever, and then we become distressed and worried, and this is our own interest as caregivers, as professionals, and this interest is the same as the patients. But in other instances, of course, there are interests intrinsic to the professionals which are not shared, obviously, not in all ways with the patients. And when we use clinical ethics and ethic deliberations and ethic committees, I think they inevitably must be a forum for discussing the frustration of healthcare workers, very much so, I think, during last years at least. And when the patient's voice is missing in this discussion, I think that the interests more belong to the professionals than to the patient can be too strong. So what I really was thinking about during this day is this evolving to ethics for professionals rather than, or isn't it a gap which we have to be aware of and perhaps do something about in the future? Thank you.
Okay, Inga.
Thank you. It's a lot of things coming around when you hear all this very good experience this day. Thank you. I think we, from professionals organization, really have to speak about the importance to give place for reflections for all the staffs, because otherwise we can't do our work properly. That's very, very important. We know it, but not everybody. That's a short one.
Okay. I have not been a speaker here, so I also have a consideration about the experts in the ethical committees. I have a problem myself sometimes when you go out and discuss with consultant physicians. And if you is a consultant physician, that maybe that's something you have been thinking of, or also your consultant physicians normally think that if they are experts in medicine, they are also experts in ethics, medical ethics, or at least clinical ethics. And they are not interested in unsolicited advices or something. So here we have a problem. I would like to ask you first, do you have these experiences from the United States too?
Yes, oh yes. That's not peculiar to any country. But, in a way, everyone is expert in their own ethics. Ethics is a peculiar field because everybody brings to it an ethics education that happened in their culture. So, when your mother or your father sent you out and said, be good, they had something in mind, and we all learned what that was, and we have our own ideas of what's good and what's right and what's fair and so forth. And so, there is ethics expertise in the sense of familiarity with the arguments within normative theories and certain traditions, and those are very helpful as ways of unpacking moral problems and thinking about them. But that's one little piece of ethics expertise. It really shouldn't trump your own expertise about what your convictions are about the important values in your life and how you want to live it. Which I need to understand, just as you need to understand something about why this presents a problem for the people taking care of you. And so I think the thing that people bring has to be a kind of double preparation, where if you're a moral philosopher, you have to develop at least amateur competence in being a patient. Not that you have to be a patient, although I've recently been one. But you have to be familiar at an amateur level with the health professions. So you know what, at least to some extent, it's like to be a nurse, or what a nurse does, or be a doctor or a surgeon, or what they do, and so forth. And health providers and patients who are serving on ethics committees have to have at least amateur competence in some of these moral ideas. Doesn't mean we each have to be expert in everything, but I think there has to be a familiarity with and a respect for each. And the most important grounding, in my opinion, is that because we all bring ethical convictions to the table, my ethical convictions aren't necessarily better than anybody else's, even if I happen to be articulate about how I argue them. That doesn't make me right, especially as regards your values or your values. And anyway, so that's, I think we have to have that kind of humility about expertise in ethics, because it's not like being a surgeon. It's about being a person, and we are all that. I didn't. I just said that kind of emphatically.
We will return to the point after a little while. Is there any other who have experience of consultant physicians and or experts?
I was wondering if I could comment on another thing. Of course, there's a century-old discussion within philosophy whether there are moral experts as such. But I think in healthcare, at least in a Swedish setting, there's yet another aspect that problematizes this, and I think Mikael mentions it nicely when he brings in the patients or even the general public, because as a matter of fact, Swedish healthcare is largely funded by the public, and to a certain extent I believe that we have also a responsibility towards the public that is, so to speak, external of the role as medical ethical experts. Even if it were so that there could be ethical experts, we still have to somehow be in touch with general society, because as a matter of fact, well, I'm paid by general society, and I think that I should give back to general society rather the kind of healthcare that they have paid me to give them, and that includes the ethical aspects. So personally, I think that every physician or every nurse should once in a while hang out with their friends who are not in the healthcare trade. Just give a report. This is what we do in healthcare. Does it seem to make sense to you? And kind of pay mind if they say, oh, do you do it that way? That sounds horrible. There might be an issue here.
Yeah.
I would like to comment on that because it raises some very interesting issues. I mean, traditional medical ethics is focused on the relation between doctor and patient, or nurse, doctor and patient. But of course, what you bring up is also some other issues that I asked Christine about in the break, because there is the mission of healthcare in the society. And of course, because that's funded by taxpayer money, you also have some obligations to provide what the taxpayers want you to provide. And that's where how you use resources, one of your research themes, Nicholas, priority setting, that becomes part of that, because the way you use the resources are related to how you think of the mission of healthcare in society. And of course, that's a different tack than focusing on the relation between doctor-patient or doctor-nurse-patient, because it has to do with the organization of the system, how the system is steered, and the system of incentives and rewards and punishments. And you know, there's been a lot of discussion in Sweden about that, and that will come up also in the National Council quite recently.
Okay. That was, you would...
In the back.
In the back, okay.
I hope he had a great conversation.
My name is Marco Bartocci, and I'm a Karolinska University Etiska Rådet. I'm sitting there. I have a question about this, the patient perspective, and we have to address the person, not the physician, in some ethical discussions. What do you think about, because this came to our discussion when we are forming a new ethic committee, what do you think about to have a patient representative sitting in an ethic committee? Nowadays, in the new organization of Karolinska, for example, there are many of the steering committees, mainly for clinical decision, that has also a representation from the patient, or concerning the pediatric department, for example, the parents. But what about to have, what is your comment, what about to have a patient representative in the ethic committee? Thank you.
I think there are a lot of problems with that. One obvious problem is what representative? Of course, there are all kinds of conditions and diseases and disorders and whatever you want to call them. And you can't have a representative of every single one, right? And you tend to have representatives of patient groups who are strong, so to speak. The weakest patient groups, the ones who die prematurely or geriatric, they won't even be, they are not even candidates. So you tend to get focused on the problem that is the focus of the very representative that you choose. And in line what we have been discussing, I'm not saying you should never have it, but there are problems. In line what we have, the discussion we have been having, you can consider to have a citizen instead as a representative. That is sort of a potential patient for any. Yeah. So I think you should be careful to choose a member from the Cancer Society or the Diabetes Society, unless there is a specific area. If you are an ethics group that are into a specific area, then it's appropriate to have patient representatives. Yes.
Mikael?
I think it could be a good idea, and your objection, Niklas, is the classic democratic one. Well, you have to be chosen or a representative of a great number of persons with different needs, and some of them cannot be represented because they are not born at all. And that's, of course, from a democratic point of view, a correct objection, but still the rule and the task for the representative is not to represent a specific group of patients or needs.
It should not be.
It should not be and must not be. But I think such a representative, either a citizen or a person with experience from being a patient, might be a kind of protection against medicalization, because when the discussion, as you mentioned, Mats, tends to go far away from the value conflict, from the ethical dilemma, and start to be sophisticated medicine instead, or also indeed a kind of protection against moral relativism, because for a patient there is no such situation when it's nothing is better, nothing is worse. From the perspective of a patient, something is the best, and I want it.
If I might add something about this, what I've reflected on, and we've talked about this at the Ethics Committee at Karolinska, the concept of a community member or some non-medical person, someone from this pool of potential patients. And another way that I think one can bring or lift the voice of the patient in this entire process, which is, of course, the whole purpose is to prioritize the patient, or should be at least, is that during ethics consultations, at least in the United States, when you go out into the wards to respond to a consultation, and usually consultations are solicited by the specialist, so you sometimes can avoid that problem by not giving unsolicited advice. But assuming you are consulted by a specialist, or any, for that matter, member of the personnel on the ward. In the US, some of the consults can even come from the patient themselves. And so that's an empowering feature to the way a consultation service can be run. And then when the ethics committee or ethics consultation service or team goes out to do the consultation, part of the fact findings is to speak to the patient and the family. So they suddenly fill out all of these medical wrinkles that maybe we don't see when we're sitting around the table at the ethics committee meetings. So I think it's critical to do that, but it's hard to involve the patient on the ethics committee due to privacy issues, etc. But if it's specific in that we're dealing with a specific patient case, then it's quite appropriate to engage the voice of that particular patient.
Inga?
Sorry, I'm taking this in Swedish. Is it okay? Ett helt annat perspektiv på den frågan. Jag representerar ju sjuksköterskornas etiska råd och vi har ju andra perspektiv in på hur vi reflekterar så att säga. Där har vi valt att ha en, även som ni har, allmänhetens representant, och det är inte vilken allmänhet som helst utan det är en ganska oftast en stark röst som är utanför hälso- och sjukvården för att få det perspektivet på de frågorna vi arbetar med. För vi blir väldigt inne i vårt eget, vi tror att vi vet allting bäst ibland, så är det ju. Och då kommer det en röst som säger, nu har du tänkt på det här och det här. Så att de perspektiven i alla de här etiska samtalen som vi har är väldigt viktiga att få in. Så vi tänker nog lite olika på att få in det här. Det handlar om var vi är någonstans, i vilken kontext vi gör det så att säga. Okay. Det är värdefullt.
Okay, say something about.
Did you understand?
No, but Madhuri, yeah.
A short
Thank you for that.
summary, yeah.
So I have worried a lot about this problem too, and there are difficulties with involving community members and patients in as members of ethics committees, although I would never want the perfect solution to the problem being an enemy of getting a almost good enough solution to the problem. And so barring the fact that no single person can represent patients or the public, and that there are privacy and confidentiality concerns we have to worry about and address. We tackled this two ways in my committee. One is that we had a membership of 24. 20 of those members were drawn from a variety of places in the medical center, and 4 of them were community members, largely because in the very earliest days of the committee, we discovered that one is overwhelmed by the professional ease of the people in the room. We see this all the time in other kinds of ethics committees too. They're federally mandated on research ethics committees and they almost never say anything. So, one it just doesn't work. Not that 4, can represent all of the public or patients, but at least they have each other and can also develop relationships with members of the committee that enable them to participate in a more full way in the conversations. That said, they do sign confidentiality pledges when they join the committee. Still, there are some issues that keep repeating where just having a community voice just doesn't give you a good sense of how this hits the public, and you don't want it to hit the public through the front page of the newspaper. And so instead what we did is set up something called it's called Community Ethics Committee. They have since developed their own nonprofit organization called Community Voices in Medical Ethics. You can see this on our webpage. And so that is 16 people representing a variety of ages, ethnic backgrounds, gender affiliation, religions, etc. And they you know, the way we use them as an ethics committee in a hospital is, let's say we keep getting this problem about how to allocate a scarce medicine. And we say to the community ethics committee, this problem has come up repeatedly in our ethics committee. We wonder what your view of it is. We've now had, I think it's 12 issues that over the last more than a decade we have taken to the community ethics committee. They sometimes take months to talk about the problems that we've asked them to comment on. The most recent one had to do with use of puberty stopping drugs in pre-pubertal children, older children and young adolescents. And before that, it was ethical workarounds for allocating free pharmaceuticals out of closets in the clinic. Anyway, so there have been a whole bunch of these, and it's been very helpful to have this group of the public talk to our ethics committees about the things that worried them, about the things they were shocked by, about the things they thought were okay and why. So those are two ways we've tried to increase our understanding of the public and the public's understanding of what we're doing.
May I ask, Mats, have you experienced or considered lay representatives in your committee?
Yeah, we have considered it, but we have not used any representatives. And I don't like the word here to represent something, because I do not think that they represent anything but themselves. I like your solution with a group that you can consult and broaden the perspectives. That sounds like a great idea, but I do not like the idea that one person should represent a whole population, even for some illness or so, or the general public. Neither, nor for democratic reasons, or for, I think it's a strange idea that one person should be able to be the voice of a population without having studied what the general population have to say about the matter.
We don't call them representatives, we just call them community members.
That's
members.
Good.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't want to comment on this. I want to come back to your earlier question,
Yeah,
if I may. I can do that later.
I have an additional issue about it, but you might comment on it now if you...
All right. I think Christine made a valid distinction between different kinds of ethics. I mean, everybody is an expert on his or her own ethics in the sense that they know their own basic values and what's important to them. But it doesn't follow from that if you're an expert on your own ethics, you're also an expert on ethics.
No.
Because, as Mats showed in his slides, there are many things you need to know and many skills you need to have. And so there's some mileage to get out of that discussion, but you must be aware also of the traps to draw the wrong conclusion, because the wrong conclusion is we don't need to bother about all these other things that also are needed, knowledge and skills.
Okay, I would just follow up this by saying that in Sweden, I think we have a problem because there are armchairs philosophers and there may be armchairs ethicists also. And sometimes they might say in a certain way that they are talking about blood and sperm ethics, or what we would say. So all of us standing here are probably blood and sperm ethicists. But is it a problem to get philosophers or ethicists into the ethical committees or ethical councils in Sweden and in the United States? Or have you plenty of bioethic ethicists? Maybe you can begin.
So there are lots of armchair ethicists. That's how ethics works, by social approval and disapproval. So, I mean, you're all armchair ethicists. I am too. because, you know, the way we think about what we ought to do is by starting on the basis of what little we know or what feelings we have, what values we think we have, sometimes don't know until they clash. And so we start with a reaction. In fact, there's a book about this, you know, the guy who talks about the fact that we neurologically have a moral judgment long before it ever reaches our cognitive capacity to think of it. Yeah, I was thinking, but I can't think of his name. Kahneman, no. Anyway, I'll think of it later. Kahneman, that's it. Thinking fast and slow. And so, you know, your initial ethical judgment is sort of like the automatic setting on a camera. And thinking slow is when you actually use the education you have to think through the normative arguments and so forth, and you can do your own settings on the camera. Anyway, I digress. But the fact that clinicians sometimes don't want philosophers in their operating room or their clinic or their whatever is indeed a barrier that has to be overcome. And sometimes it can't be. It's very hard to overcome it unless you have some way in. And there are a variety of strategies for doing that. We were talking about, you know, co-chairing committees. So, you know, a lot of what we do in our Master of Bioethics program at Harvard Medical School is pair up philosophers and clinicians, because the clinicians just, however hard they try and how much of the ethics literature they have, they still don't have the facility with the reasoning skills that well-trained philosophers have. And similarly, philosophers think they've read all the literature on gene editing and genomic analysis or whatever it is, and they still don't know what a deeply trained, you know, person doing research on the bench in addition to clinical knows about the frontier of whole genome sequencing. So putting them together means that their crosstalk is enriching for everyone, and they demonstrate simultaneously to the students and the rest of the faculty the kind of conversation that has to happen in order to be sufficiently well informed about the science and ethically well trained to recognize the ethical challenges and ways of reasoning about them. So I think it can happen. It's just persuading, you know, an administrative structure that it can be funded. Ethicists are a lot cheaper than doctors. They're even sometimes cheaper than some nurses. So, you know, part of it is figuring out how you bring the data to an administrator that is sufficiently persuasive to fund the program. And believe me, I spent 30 years doing that. It's hard. On the other hand, there are some funded ethicists in the United States and more of them.
I can just add, we tried that in Lund. It worked very well when I was teaching together with a clinician.
Yeah.
There is some red tape, as you indicated, because the system is not devised to pay for two.
No.
In the same classroom, two teachers. But of course, if the ethicist comes for free, there's no problem.
Yeah, you have to control the budget.
Yes.
I mean, you have to be able to say that you need both.
You need both. I think we all agree on that. It works very well the way you described. It's very good for the students.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the blend, I know that there is actually a small booklet, which I brought with me at some point to one of our meetings, that's published in the US. I don't remember which organization, ethics organization, that is the Healthcare Ethics Competencies for Consultation Services. And the idea is that in an ideal world, you have a pure ethicist and a pure clinician. But in reality, it's not that easy to find ethicists in the US either, maybe in Boston and New York and Chicago, but not out in the middle of a small community hospital in Iowa. So when I worked in a very small community in Michigan, which was 4 hours from Detroit, the closest university hospital, then The ethics committee was purely clinician-based, for there were absolutely no ethicists anywhere nearby. But by following the recommendations in the competencies book, what you can do is sort of create a hybridized model. So you can either have one of each, please jump in if I'm wrong here, or you can try to take what you have and fill the areas which are lacking. So, and it would be through formal education or workshops, etc., and ongoing continuing medical education to raise the competency, the ethical competency in the ethics committee, so that you move away from maybe what you mean by this armchair ethics.
Okay.
I'm really glad you said that, because there are the association, the American Society of Bioethics and Humanities, ASBH. If you Google that and you say bioethics or something, because ASBH can stand for other things, there are now actually 3 books that had been put out by our professional organization. The first was the one that Madhuri is mentioning, which was a committee that pulled together the knowledge, the skills, and this was the controversial part, the attitudes of persons who are qualified to facilitate ethics, healthcare ethics consultation. So there's that competencies book, but there's also an education guide which fills out the knowledge piece of the competencies. And so there are chapters on things like informed consent and coercion and so forth, and with readings in them. And a lot of ethics committees take that book one chapter at a time, and people take turns for. There's now a third one, which is superb. It's my favorite, which is a case book and of actual ethics consultations, and they are written iteratively. So a little piece at a time. So they, the facts that you learned at the beginning, and then, what the ethics consult response was, and then what happened, and then what further response there was, and then what happened, and so forth. And it has trigger questions in it to help an ethics committee practice at least the cognitive skills associated with moral deliberation. So, and those books are like $20 a piece or something. They're just. I'll look it up and I'll write it on that piece of paper.
Please.
So
Okay.
I have 2 of them.
Okay, I don't know if I was saying something bad about consultant physicians in the beginning, but I will also we are going to close this seminar soon, and I'll just say that sometimes very skilled and experienced consultant physicians or nurses have developed some kind of proficiency skills or creativity. My favorite example is Israeli physicians from intensive care units who have solved an ethical dilemma by installing timers on the ventilators. So they are not taking a stand about how to withdraw the life-supporting machines, but taking a stand on whether or not they should initiate one. And sometimes they are solving problems without any ethical consideration, the practical solution.
It's about the timing.
Yeah. Oh yes, that's a technical solution of an ethical.
The basic issue remains.
Yeah. I think there are half a minute to each of you before we are closing.
I've already talked too much. So
I talk too much.
Hand over to me.
Michael, do you
talk too much?
Too much.
I haven't talked too much, but I think. Oh, this is a hard one. I think it's very important that we are having this sort of discussion. So thank you, Marie, for bringing us together this day. Really, I think we should do that more often, because it comes a lot of question up that we have to take care of more. So thank you.
Okay.
Well, I've learned a lot today, but I'm also glad that we face the same problems. So we are not unique in Sweden or in Lund, but we face the same problems and we can discuss them this way. I think that's been nice.
Marie Schenik is very sorry she could not be here, but she will get better. And when she gets better, she will return to our workplace at the ethics unit. She is there almost every day. And if you have any gifts or greetings to Marie, please come to me after the session and I will bring them forward to Marie.
You are.
Well, I was a bit touched by that, but I wanted to say just briefly that I wish to emphasize that we've been speaking a bit about the concept of moral experts and such. And in addition to that, I think that we must remember not to, so to speak, centralize ethical competence. It is not only we that should harbor ethical competence, but rather be very active so as to decentralize that. I believe that our goal must be that each and every individual working in healthcare should be as ethically interested and proficient as possible.
Okay, Amina.
And I would just like to stress that it's really important to have a Marie Schenik. That all hospitals should have a Marie Schenik that really mind the gaps between the university and the hospital.
I agree. I think that Marie, I'm so sad that she missed this because I feel this would have been a real validation for everything she's done for decades. And I was extremely happy that you were able to come and, as you said, Mats, to see the commonalities in all of our experiences. It reminds me that we need to keep speaking with each other. So,
okay.
Thank you.
And I hope that continues. I mean, I just want to say what I said at the beginning, which is when we first had dinner, we very much wanted to figure out ways to collaborate, both educational activities, but also cross-country research in bioethics, which I would very much like to see us able to do. So I hope this is just the beginning of an ongoing relationship, and I'm grateful to Marie for making it possible, and congratulations.
Okay. Thank you very much to Maria and to you. Thank you.